So welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you could join us and welcome our virtually visiting artist, Curtis Bartone, who is an instructor at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia. So I'll now turn it over to him to discuss his work with us. Thanks, Curtis.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. I just want to first thank you guys all for coming. It's nice. We were talking earlier about how nice it is to. One of the benefits of Zoom is that people, if I had this show in Washington State, which if it wasn't COVID, it'd probably be on ground. I would be there, but you guys wouldn't. So this is a chance that I can see people, and some people I'm looking at the names I haven't seen in like a huge long time. So anyway, I'm going to get started with my presentation. And hopefully you guys can all hear me. I'm not seeing my little Zoom window lighting up. Am I coming across sound-wise?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good, okay. It always makes me nervous if I don't see there it is, little yellow window around my. Okay, so I'm going to screen share here and talk about my work. Some of you may have gone to the virtual show. But this is going to give you some other work, and I'm going to just highlight a few pieces in it and talk mostly about new work. Let me just screen share here, my presentation. Okay. Hopefully you guys are all seeing this. Just write me a chat or something if you're not. Anyway, I'm going to start with this piece because I'll give you a little bit of background about me, a really quick overview. There's a lot of work leading up to this. And if you're an artist and you've been around long enough, there's you kind of mark time by the type, the body of work you were doing at the time. And it's one of those kind of interesting things about being an artist is you realize, I think if you're not making something along the way, you think you're the same person, your whole life, or at least up till now. And when I look back at my artwork, I'm like, oh, what was I thinking that? I can't even know. I was a whole different person, and I can see it. So you're kind of tracking your years with your work. But anyway, this is kind of a rare painting because it's at the time, and this has changed a lot. This is one of the few paintings. I lived in Chicago, Illinois for 12 years, and I'll go backwards a little bit. I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania. And most of that time was spent in rural parts. In fact, for a while, when my parents got divorced and remarried, I lived on a farm. And I got really used to being outside and being, kind of seeing the natural world change. And in our lifetime, especially, it's changed so much. But anyway, then I stayed in the Midwest for a long time. So I went to Columbus College of Art and Design in Columbus, Ohio. That's where I went to undergraduate school. And then I always wanted to live in Chicago. So I applied to a lot of graduate schools, but I got accepted to Northwestern in Chicago, or in Evanston. And I moved to Chicago, and it really, really shaped who I am as an artist. I found my little group of artists that I was associated with. I learned most of what I know about printmaking after graduate school, just with a little group of artists that all printed together at the place called the Evanston Art Center, which is now kind of coming back again. But anyway, I feel like Chicago formed me. But oddly, I was doing work about, and I'm going to talk about this more, but about different places and how we sort of make collages in our head of what the natural world is like, and also what other places are like. And some of them we've been to, but most of them we haven't, and how those images come to us and I was kind of morphing them into sort of believable combinations of still life things, almost looking like natural science, just like displays that I've been seeing in the Field Museum, which influenced me a lot. So Chicago was a huge, I feel like that formed me as an artist, and my brain is still there, but a lot of things changed. So this is the last painting I did in Chicago, and it's probably the only one that actually contains anything in Chicago. So it has this Chicago skyline. This painting is, and you'll see this in some of my other work. A lot of my work is influenced by literature and things I read. And this was a Saul Bellow novel called Herzog, and the main character, the only nature he notices are these parrots that somehow survive the Chicago winter. So I based this painting on that. Just that idea that, how did these escaped domestic parrots survive a Chicago winter? Because anyone who's ever been to Chicago or lives in Chicago or lived in Chicago, they're like the nastiest winters anywhere. Anyway, so in 2001, I had a lot of weird things happen, and I got tired of like this living in the city, and I was teaching like 3 different places and trying to make work, and I just wanted like to have like just a regular full-time job. I also wanted to change. A lot of things happened. My mother died, and just like shook, when stuff like that happens, your brain just needs to reshuffle, and sometimes you do things that you might not do otherwise. And I saw someone's vacation pictures of Savannah, Georgia, and my wife and I just thought, let's see if we can get a job there, or one of us can get a job there, and let's move there. So I applied to Savannah College of Art and Design, and they accepted me, and I moved there. And it was just fascinating. It was so foreign to me. And at this time I started, another change that happened was I started traveling a lot more. I had never really been out of the country until, I think 1995 was the first time I've ever been out, not counting Canada. And I started just being addicted to traveling. And when I went here, I'm like, this is way more exotic than any place I've ever traveled. It's like so weird. And it's the South, when you're from the North, is just so different. But anyway, there's places like this, the Savannah Wildlife Refuge, which as soon as I saw it, I'm like, wow, this is just really strange. It's really a remarkable place. Just a lot of mixes of, you can go to the ocean in 15 minutes. You can, go walk through the marshes and see birds and alligators and things. And I started to actually be hugely affected by this. And I was kind of disappointed. I'm like, I'm not in a big city. There's nothing going on here artistically. I mean, the school is amazing, but and I'm like, that was a stupid thing to leave Chicago, where I had all this, audience and fellow artists and everything. And then I realized that it was starting to affect my work in a weird way. And I've had this conversation with some of my colleagues recently. In fact, one who I think is here, one of the painting faculty, that just the fact that you don't know how living in a place is going to affect you, or even going to a place is going to affect you. So this, so I started wanting to do these big drawings, including, kind of morphing all the things that come from other things I was thinking about earlier, and also where I was living at the time, which was Savannah. So the parts of the beach, and just kind of morphing these things together. And these were kind of, I always give myself, sometimes I give myself almost like assignments, but this I was doing pieces about the elements. So air, water, fire, that sort of thing. I started doing more etchings. I've always been a painter. My background is painting and illustration, and I've always been sort of like a printmaker in denial. At this time, I was still that. So I was like, I'm a painter. If you're a painter, like you're a painter, right? And you just maybe we'll do some printmaking on the side, even though I had, been making a lot of prints and stuff. I started to more embrace the fact that I just love this process. And all of my stuff comes out of drawing, really. And to me, and this is probably, like someone who's like a printmaker doesn't necessarily feel like this, but but I mean, I felt like this is a great way to make a drawing. I wasn't that interested in making like 100 prints like you can do if you're a printmaker. I was more interested in, wow, this is the coolest and most different way of making a drawing, or, those getting marks that you could never get. Anyway, so you can see that in the background is, and this comes into play in a lot of my work, things that don't belong together, forcing them together. This actually doesn't belong together, but this in the Savannah Wildlife Refuge, if you look across it, if you're in it and look across it, you can see the paper mill. There's a giant paper mill in the background, and at night especially, it's so surreal. And so this scene is like, I mean, I blew up the paper mill, but it is there, and it pops up in a lot of my work because it's such a strange juxtaposition. And there it is again. And just talk about some themes that have moved in and out of my work. and some consistent themes, even though I'm changing, some of the other things that I'm putting in. And it's always that idea of how we classify things that we see in nature or otherwise, like how harmful, beneficial. We basically classify things in a non-scientific way that's useful to us. Like what have these things done for us lately? Like, and domestic and wild, why do we call one thing, or invasive and native, these things these categories that we have, and classifications, and our need to control and make sure that the invasive things stay out. So a lot of my work is about that and creating tension between those things. And the other thing is, Savannah is just full of living things, like and poisonous things. Like we have 3 different kinds of fairly common poisonous snakes, 4 actually. And we have poisonous spiders. We have black widows and brown recluse. And I wanted to put this piece is about strip mining, and just that idea of this series of work that I was doing about how we're really bad at risk assessment. Like we're really terrified of these black widow spiders that probably have killed, maybe kill 1 person every, 20 years. As opposed to like these things that are really bad for us, the things we do to our environment or pollute the water supply and things like that. But anyway, so I wanted to put a black widow spider in this, and I worked from all different sources, but I wanted to like see one. I walked out in my yard and it took me like 5 minutes to find one. Just like, they're just like, it's so easy to just find things like this. The nature of my sort of the way I live, where I teach is really, really intense for like 10 weeks. And then we have these long breaks. I started to get a desire to, I found that the experience moving to Savannah, so my talk is basically about place and how place is affected. Not just like a lot of times I'll go to a place and that place won't enter my work at all. Like I'll be in this most amazing place and my work has nothing to do with it. I just want to be there and displace myself and kind of be surrounded by it. And then some, but anyway, how that place not only shows up in my work or different places and mixing them, but how place changes my work. So me being in a different place changes the work. So I guess the kind of the theme of this, of how I put this presentation together is basing it on place. So travel starting to show up a lot in my work. It has, but in this point, and mixing with some of the like religious things I was researching, just kind of Bible stories and things like that. And I wanted to do some projects that I needed to go somewhere and just be away and be immersed. So for some of you that might not be an artist, or there are residencies where you can go and just you're basically they want artists to come in and make work. So I started to have projects that I wanted to do that. So I wanted to make big etchings. And it's something that I've always worked on a relatively small scale. My paintings got pretty big, but my printmaking always was kind of small, and I wanted to make big etchings. So in preparation for that, I got a couple students to help me print these big plates just to figure out, do I really want to do big etchings? So I made these, and my style, I kind of loosened up just because these are bigger, so I left more space, and I was also starting with a ground that made a texture over the whole thing, but I was still pretty fussy with my drawing and really careful and rendering things really like in a hyper real way, some things at least, not everything. Then I went to a place, something happened between this piece and this piece. And you can see that this is like really atmospheric. There's parts that are just blown away. And this is huge. This is, so each one of these panels is about 30 by 40, and they're just big copper plates. And these things take, if anyone's ever done etching, it just takes forever to wipe and print and etching. And I did this at a place, it's on Murano, which is the glass island that's by Venice. And they're equipped to make large scale prints. But when I went there, it was like chaos, and it was kind of beautiful chaos in a way, but they had record, and this is just, one of those climate change kind of things, and it's worse now, but when I was there, it was bad. Record Aqua Alta, which is when, the tides and everything are all together in the right way, that the city is just covered with water, and they're kind of used to it, but I certainly wasn't. And this was like August and September, so it was starting to get cold as well. And it kind of, and this is me in a coffee shop that's flooded, and they just raise everything and everything just goes on as normal. Anyway, I went there for about 2 months, and just to make large etchings in this place. So that it's equipped to make large etchings. And I say equipped, it really was kind of neglected. So I had to learn so much about chemistry. So what happened was I spent all of this time drawing these plates. And I'm going to talk about the processes that I used later. I kind of broke this up into 2 parts. But I was making these big plates and spending a lot of time on the drawing. And the drawings it's called soft ground. So I'm drawing on top of this ground that's picking up where I'm drawing. And I'm just making these really tight, big drawings that take hours and hours and hours. And we have the guy who was running the studio had these big tubs of ferric chloride, which is what we use to etch the copper. And I had no idea what it was and where he got it. He said it's from some industrial place that gives it to him. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to dunk my plate in this. So I dunked my plate in it. So here's me working on it. And it completely, everything went way too dark. And I lost like tons of detail. So I of course was like panicked, because I only had, for me, I work fairly slow. So having 2 months to do this giant project was like, oh my God, I can't have this happen. So, because I was going to put more layers on it and stuff. So I started scraping into, the good thing about copper is you can scrape and burnish into it to get lights out again. And I spent, I don't know, I can't even tell you how long I spent to do that, but here's me doing that. And this is me, not like, this is when I'm less stressed. So first I was like, oh my God, I'm just like totally destroyed this project. And I ended up with these effects that like I was forced to accept them and like work with them. And it completely changed how I saw my work, just like completely. And so if you guys went to the show, you see like the work doesn't look like anything like I showed you at the beginning. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to make this happen more often. Like just put things in acid and go, all right, I'm going to let it overbite a little bit and then just start scraping things back out of it. It completely changed how I work, and it completely changed how I saw these. And one of the things I wanted to do, but you have these habits that you can't break. I was forced to break these habits. I was like, I always wanted to get this atmosphere and this like mystery where things got buried and came out of it and stuff. But it's hard to do that when you've rendered something for like 3 months. So here it was, and I'm like, I'm just going to do more of this. So you can see like some of the surface, and I'm pressing things, fabric and stuff into the plate too to create. And so the acid's eating those textures. So I'm doing it even more, so I have to scrape even more. So I got these like really cool like ghosts of things that used to be there and got covered, and things that I'm pulling out, and then I'm indulging myself because I love to like render things to death. So I'm like picking little areas that I'm rendering to death. So then I'm like, wow, this is really cool. So I need to go to more places and do bigger projects. And so I'm applying to things like crazy. You guys that are artists and my colleagues especially know that you apply to a lot of things and hope that you get something. I don't like to go to residencies where you have to pay, and because it's expensive enough just to go there. So I apply to residencies that at least like will put you up and give you a place to work, and you might have to get food or get there or whatever. But I wanted to do this piece, a series of 10 etchings. I've always wanted to do this, and I never had the time because I'm like, it's 10. I just want to do all 10 of them. They're medium-sized etchings, 2 plates each, but I wanted to do a series about the plagues of Egypt, the 10 plagues. I didn't want to illustrate them. I had no interest in them other than I wanted to kind of use them to rein in my research, like kind of research plagues or research locust infestation, and kind of use it to kind of address the themes that I was working in my work. So I got accepted to a place in Boston, Emmanuel College, which has, it's a program called ECAR, where they're, Emmanuel College artist residency. And they bring in artists for the whole summer when they don't have classes. And they let their like art majors come and watch them work, and they pick like a painter and a sculptor and just people from 4 different fields. And I got accepted there, and I thought this is perfect. So I had a print shop all to myself to do this project. So I made these two plate etchings. So one of the things that I started to get interested in was how printmaking is different than just doing a drawing or a painting, because you have to have a dialogue with the process. Like you make something and then the process tells you that it doesn't want to do it. And you either have to force it to happen or you have to listen to it and go, okay, how am I going to work with you? So you have this dialogue with this process that's a little bit different. I mean, some painters paint like this. And I started to figure out how to do that. But that's what I love about printmaking, especially etching. So I wanted to kind of embrace that and have, like, I did these gestural pieces, and as I was correcting my mistakes, I was leaving traces of all my mistakes. And then I would have another plate that was like my alter ego that would render certain areas. And so there's two plates kind of in opposition. Just like I kind of feel like it's a metaphor for wanting to control, like you can't control. If you think you can control things, it's just an illusion anyway. And we all have that illusion, right? We think we can control things. So I like that seeping into my work, because my work is often about that, our need to control the environment. Like we have to, oh my God, there's a weed in my yard. I have to dump like a ton of, herbicide on it. That kind of thing. So this is, of course, the Locust Plague. It's pretty obvious. That's why I started with that, because it kind of relates to the other picture I showed. But I did some really fun research for this, like finding out like how many pesticides it takes to grow like corn and cotton, like our main crops, right? And soybeans, of course, which I don't think I put in here. And what actually causes locust plagues. And learning things like that locusts are actually like basically grasshoppers on steroids. There's not like a separate animal called a locust. It is a grasshopper that just became like an eating machine for a bunch of different environmental reasons. And then studying herbicides, which is something that I've gone back to studying a lot about. And looking at the water to blood plague and thinking about pollution, water pollution especially, and algae blooms and all those kinds of things. But also looking at, thinking of the plagues of Egypt, what Egypt was and what it was biblically, what it was, way before then, and what it is now. And thinking about war and, unrest and religious tension. And this also caused me to work differently. This is one print that went real bad. I don't know what I did. I did something to the soft ground that a lot of it kind of peeled away, or like what we call foul bite, which is where it etches where you don't want it. And I just, instead of scraping it away that I normally do, I left a whole lot of it in here. So I started to learn to even live with more things going bad and more chaos. I took this back to Chicago, back to Savannah with me, and started to put it in. I started to do lithographs in this way too, where there were two separate, because I wanted to see what those marks, how that would change the marks. And so I was taking some of these themes and combining them with other things I was looking at in this area. So the things I was doing before I started traveling, now that I'm going places and working, and then I'm starting to mush them together in my brain, just like they're kind of mushing together in my work. And I've always been fascinated with weeds and, good plants and bad plants, right? Weeds and the ones that we want. And just how those categories are so strange. And what happens when we try to kill those weeds? Like we're wiping out bees, right? Or wiping out monarchs because we're just dousing all these areas with big, huge areas that they have to fly over with pesticides. But looking at pigweed, and pigweed's one of my favorite plants. And it is one of the most, right now, what's happening with, Roundup. It can't be killed. It finds the most fascinating ways to evade herbicides. And now it just, if there's like, it does things like it'll go into seed prematurely when it's being poisoned, like things that it's adapted to do just from selection. And it produces so many seeds that it can mutate quickly. So these things are just fascinating to me. But again, like looking at something being both good and bad, it's bad because it's like killing our food plants, but it's good because we can use it for phytoremediation, which is where we suck up lead and stuff from the soil with these weeds because they're so fast growing and they have huge tap roots that can pull all this stuff out. So here's a use that is going to help us. So these kind of ambiguities. I started working with succession, the idea of a landscape, not just a landscape naturally going from, like there's a fire, right? That's a good example. So, and then what grows, what replaces it, what replaces that when the trees fall over, new trees, that kind of thing, succession. So what happens to a landscape over time. But it happens also with man-made environments. Like you'll see like, something will become a farm and then it'll, that'll get rid of the forest or whatever. And then it'll become a strip mall, so that kind of succession too. But anyway, I wanted to go to, this is a residency called Playa, which is in the Great Basin in Oregon. And it's just a really beautiful place. And they can give you like a cabin. And then they had a little print shop that wasn't very well set up. And when I proposed that I wanted to come and just make some dry points, which I'll talk about in a minute, dry point etchings, they're like, hey, can you, we'll let you, we'll bring you here and you can help us, set up the shop too. So that was kind of fun too, to just get to kind of arrange their shop. But the landscape there is unbelievable and it changes so fast and like fogs roll in. And this is a seasonal lake that's only it's probably like at the deepest point, like 2 feet. And like, even if there's a big wind, the whole lake blows across the other side. It's just the weirdest thing. So a playa is that kind of lake. And I was there in the winter and, in Savannah, we don't really have winter. And I, of course, grew up in the winter. So I had this kind of hoarfrost landscape that was just so amazing. So I would hike every day. I took really long hikes and saw, birds. I'm a birder. I'm not really like some of my friends that have life lists and all that, but I've always been fascinated with birds and noticed birds. And this place was fascinating, but it really, again, this directly affected my work. Like I was doing dry points, which are really smoky kinds of etchings because you're just scratching the plate. So I started doing like these where I was just sanding and then starting to work into the sanded areas and creating. So this is not just all things from there. There are also reference from other things that I've been working with, like decay. And a lot of my work there's themes that run through my work that I'm kind of glossing over, but looking at decay and rebirth and how, again, we think death is bad, but death can, cause new life to grow. And those kinds of themes. And I just felt like, oh my God, this, when I was putting together this presentation, I'm like, I didn't even notice this. I'm like, my God, this is this place to me. When I look at it, I'm like, that's Playa, And I did a little succession triptych there, which I actually never printed quite the way I like it yet. I'm still working on these plates, in fact. But I did like some of the things happening in it. But these are like 8x10 dry points. And I'll talk about what dry point is in a minute. I wanted to include this because just to show you guys that are printmakers, my little printmaker family, most of them are here, and my SCAD printmaking family. And they know when you do an etching or any kind of print, it's not like, oh, here's my print, I'm done, I'm going to edition this and get it out. It's like a lot of revisions. We call these states, right? And you can see that this isn't all the prints I made. These are just like the steps where I'm printing and changing and printing and changing. It's like this whole like process, and it's a beautiful process, but I always tell my students, I'm like, the thing about prints is there's like a hierarchy in the art world. If you're, trying to make a living doing it, you make a painting, you can sell it for a lot of money. You make a print, it goes for less money because people know you can make a bunch of them. It is about like a third the work for me to make a painting as it is to make an etching. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm doing all this, but I love it. I mean, it's such a great process. Polar opposite, I really love Italy, and my wife and I taught ourselves Italian like as adults, just because we liked it so much. So it's fun to go there, just for that, just to speak. But we went to Sicily, and a friend of mine who might be here, who I met when I had another show at Pratt, She has a residency in Sicily. So I went there just to learn how to do a process called solar plate etching, which is a photographic etching process where you can expose it in the sun. And I thought, I've never used the sun. I use an exposure unit, but I'm gonna try to use the sun. So I'm there. I didn't go there because that's the only place with sun. I just wanted to go there. And she has a really cool shop there. So we basically lived in a small place called Tusa for a while, and it was just like in the middle of nowhere in Sicily. And it was, again, I use this image all the time now, just because it was so just amazing. But also there's just this history and this tension between, kind of how horrible, the Catholic Church was in some ways and how pervasive it is. And, some of these interesting, Catholic structures. And these are some of I didn't put any of these in the show because I looked at them as just kind of tests. So I also look at it as cheating because you basically draw on a transparency and then shoot the transparency. I like to just, work into the plate where I can scrape things out and, just work directly into the plate. But I did want to get better at it because I do workshops sometimes in this, and I do this occasionally with my students. It's kind of a fun process, but I got it to work sort of. Then I decided I got this urge to go back to painting, mainly out of curiosity. I'm like, how can I get this same dialogue with the painting that I have with printmaking? And I do love color, and I don't like to use color very much in printmaking. I don't know if my printmaking people knew that, but I use it very sparingly. I'm not really, I don't know, I don't like to plan it that much. I like painting because I like to react to color. I like to put it down and go, oh, I need to change this color to balance this color. I don't have that in printmaking. Like my colleague Deb is just amazing with that. She basically can use ink like people use paint. I'm sorry, I'm getting yelled at for my internet connection. Hopefully I'm not freezing or anything. So I went back to painting, but I couldn't do it the same way. So you saw the painting I showed at the very beginning. I can't go back and do that. I mean, I can. I just did a commission where I kind of went back into a more detailed style, which was fun to do, but it isn't what I want in the work that I want for myself. So, so I started to kind of approach it the same way, where I would just have this crazy gestural underpainting, and this is acrylic underneath. And then I just took a tiny brush with gouache and just started just fussing with these little areas to get them to sort of this extreme between the looseness and the tightness. And this was the first, I did a bunch of, smaller paintings and experiments that I was like, I'm not feeling it. And this is the one that I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm kind of knowing where I want to go with this. And I started to do some other ones. These are full sheet, 22 by 30-ish size paper. And these photographs are really, some of these are just, this is a process photograph, so it's not that polished. Anyway, some of these, by the idea of this painting comes from, I did a lot of things that were kind of based on Shakespeare and just the ideas of the natural world at the time, and how many, I just started researching how much reference there is to plants, how many references there are to plants and animals in the work, and just how tuned in he was to this stuff, and just how common it was in the world, but also kind of so alluding to some of the plants, but also some of the themes, like in Macbeth, the idea of, when Birnam Wood rises, taking back the natural order of things, which in his case was, the natural order of kings. But I was reading it as more a metaphor for their trees, right? That more of a metaphor for nature coming and taking things back, which we're starting to see a lot of nature fighting back now. Anyway, so I thought, I looked at places that I wanted to go and work when I had breaks from SCAD. And I found this place in Kolli National Park in Finland. And of course, never been to Finland. So we got accepted, or I got accepted to this place, a residency there run by the art center in Kolli, where you live. This is the downstairs part is actually a pub. It's but it's really good food. This town is amazing. Kolli has a grocery store, a tourist center, and this pub, and that's it. Oh, there was another kind of not quite legitimate restaurant down the street where this Russian woman served this really amazing food. But anyway, so the studio is an apartment or above this pub that served really good food. So we ate there and drank beer there all the time because they make their own beer too. But anyway, this is the studio I had. And one of the reasons I wanted to go there is Coley National Park is just like this really amazing just forest area. And it's also kind of interwoven with farms. And one of the things they practice there is slash and burn agriculture. And I've been fascinated with it because you're always taught that that's, it is a bad thing, like in the rainforest now, right? They burn out rainforests and the soil is crappy. But there's places like this where it's been going on so long that there's some organisms and some plants that live there or grow there that don't grow anyplace else because they don't burn anyplace else. So these plants come back after fires. And just learning how this ecosystem sort of evolved around us tampering with it. And that happened in North America too, with the Indians burning places and these ritualists, every so often would just burn and the prairies adapted to that. And this happens here too. So I was fascinated with this. And it's just a wonderful place to be and hike. And just, I started learning about this stuff and putting some of it in my work. Also like some things that are more disturbing that I learned, just about like, I was asking, do you guys have wolves? And they're like, well, they come from Russia sometimes, but they always get killed. I'm like, get killed, trying to think of what that is, so it means that they kill them, even though they're endangered. So things like that just, again, were interference of nature. And but it's funny when you're a tourist because I'm there and I'm like photographing these things that are invasive, but I don't know it because I'm like, these are so gorgeous, and I'm like going around photographing and putting them in my work. But really I don't care because I'm like, I started to realize even here that these weeds some of them are really beautiful. We call them weeds. I even like cringe when I call them weeds myself. But anyway, so I started to deal with these themes. So you can see that I have like a slash tree there and starting to, again, it's all related to succession, but this is a more tampered with kind of succession. And my drawings started to be affected by, when I draw with graphite, which is everything I do comes from drawing. It's just like my favorite thing to do. And when I used to draw with graphite, my students too, I always like make marks, don't hide your marks. But so to do this, because I'm like, I want to put things in and take them out, but I don't want to take them all the way out. So I'm smearing them and just having that mix created this like kind of foggy atmosphere that I really like. There's things, because I don't feel like a piece is that interesting until it becomes mysterious. To me, just rendering, to me, it's just a tool, right? You can use it, but just to do it by itself, that's nothing, a lot of people can do that. But how do you use it? Where do you put it? And is it useful? Does it serve the content of your work? So I kind of let go of a lot of my tendencies just because I'm like, that there's no reason to do that. Maybe blur it away, let it just dissolve. And I think about that, kind of being a metaphor for memory too, just how things fade. Even just in the process of making an art piece, that idea gets ditched. So you kind of bury it. It's just having that process get tracked in the work more, which I was always trying to cover up my process, like make it finished, get rid of my underdrawing. And now I'm just like, wow, the underdrawings are so cool. So I'm keeping them and just making, and I used to plan things more, like I'd have preliminary drawings and I teach like that a lot, but in my own work now, I just do everything on the piece. Not everything. I mean, I do some thumbnails and I have a lot of reference. It can be drawings. I'll take anything. I'll steal some part of someone's illustration, but I mush it together so much that no one would ever be able to like go, oh, that's a natural science illustration from the 18th century. But a lot of it's my photographs, a lot of it's my sketches. I'm even starting to collage in Photoshop, which I'm a very analog person. So for me, that's like huge use of technology. So I started doing these at Coley National Park. And then these are the newest pieces in the show are kind of stemming from this. And this was a place called Coley. And it's funny when So this is one of the tourist attractions that's there, that's near Coley National Park, and you climb way up on this sort of high area and look down at this lake with these cool little islands in it. But I went there and I'm like, oh, it'd be really cool to learn some, just some phrases and things in Finnish. It is the hardest language you could ever imagine to learn. It's not related. It's not an Indo-European language, so it's not related to our language at all. So the vocabulary is like out the window. Like Spanish, you can go, oh, that's kind of like our word. This is nothing. There's nothing to grab onto. And they're really long words. So yeah, I kind of ditched that idea. And then these are some of the paintings that I am taking some of my sketches and things and making larger pieces out of them. And that's something I want to continue when I'm this winter break. And some of the larger drawings that stemmed out of some of this stuff. This is a detail of a painting that's coming from that, and I'm leaving a lot of the white space, but this is just one of the little details. I don't like the painting yet, so I didn't want to put the whole painting in. And then I'm starting to morph some of the things I saw in Sicily with things in Coley. Sometimes I just put things together and see if they play nice. And sometimes they don't. And that's what I like, is then I just smear it away. And a lot of those little things buried in the gestural part there are just things I put in and went, I'm not going to use it. But now, instead of trying to get rid of it or starting a new piece, I just live with it and just kind of make it work. I want to go over some, I hope I'm not rambling too long. Good. I want to go over some of the printmaking processes. For those of you that don't know about printmaking, I'll go through them kind of fast for my printmaking people who are here, but slow enough that you guys can learn a little bit about them. And I'm kind of a mad scientist, nerdy person, so I love printmaking for that reason too. I like when a student comes to me and it's like, do you think this would work? And I'm always like, I think we should go find out if that works. And that kind of tinkering, especially I teach lithography. That's the main process I'm teaching now, or that I'm focused on. And it is so much about chemistry and fun things like that. So anyway, what is a handmade print? So a handmade print is not like, it's not like a G-clay print, where you're just basically reproducing one of your pieces of artwork. For me anyway, it's an original piece of artwork. It just happens to be made with using, printmaking inks and some technology that is designed to make, more, a technology that has more commercial applications, or at least it did. Now they're much more high tech, but we use, usually you're printing them by hand, so you're inking it by hand. You may be making what's called the matrix, which is like the wood block or whatever you're pulling the print from. You may be making that digitally, but generally a handmade print is something that isn't run through an inkjet or a laser printer. It's run through a printing press with ink and hand pressed. We call it hand pressed, but the press is doing the pressing. But your hand is in there. In our shop, you're actually cranking the presses. Some of them are electric, but in other shops, but our shops are all like that. Anyway, the number on the bottom is how many are in existence. So the denominator, the bottom number, the 7 in this case, is how many are in existence. The 1 is what number I numbered it. The little thing in parentheses is because it's a gift, and the title goes in the middle, and you'll see this. So when you see this in a museum or something, you see numbers and you see a signature. That means it's a print. I'm going to talk about some of the processes I use, and I don't have any relief prints in this show, and I'll tell you why when I get to the end of this presentation, not because I don't like them, but just because I'm working on them. But anyway, relief is the simplest, and it's just basically taking a piece of linoleum or wood, or it can be anything that's flat, and carving away what you don't want and leaving what you do want. So it's a negative working process, right? You're not drawing with the carving tool, you're carving away the negative space. So when you print it, you're putting ink over the top and printing it. So anyway, this is one of mine in progress. And you can see on the right, on the left is my drawing, on the right is sort of the stain I put over it. And those light areas are where I'm carving out. So those are going to print light like this. So here's the print. So, and also notice when you make a print, it reverses. So you have to think backwards. And any printmaker can tell you, like they've either done it themselves or whatever, they forget this and they do like type or something. And they're like, right reading. We're always talking about right reading and wrong reading, right? So this is a wrong reading. image, and that's the right reading image. So you have to compose this way and carve your matrix this way. Intaglio is the opposite of relief, and that's what I've taught when I showed the slides of me in wiping that big plate in Murano. You draw, so it's the opposite. So you're actually printing the recessed areas. So when you like etch into the plate, you dig into the plate, those are going to collect ink instead of repelling ink. So it's a positive working process. You draw what you want, or wherever you work is what prints. So here's me wiping a plate, a big plate. Here's two of my students helped me print that diptych that I showed you. And here's them wiping the plate and printing it. So intaglio, unlike a relief print, an intaglio print, this is an etching, which is a type of intaglio, the most common type. We print them in with heavy pressure and dampened paper because it needs a lot of pressure to get down in and pull that ink out of the plate. And they take a long time to wipe too. You put ink on it and then you slowly take it off so that it stays in all your tiny lines. And dry point, I talked about the smoky ones that I showed you. There's someone, you just work directly. In the other kinds of etching, you coat a plate with the resist and put it in acid, and the acid can eat into wherever you've removed the ground, or the acid resist. This is direct. It's you and something sharp, and you're just drawing into it. You can sand it, you can take little tools called roulettes and make patterns, but it's just you and the metal, and you attack it and print it. There's no acid involved. You don't have to know any chemistry. You can do this in plexiglass. Still requires a lot of pressure, but you can see it gives you sort of a smokier, I'm exaggerating that in this. It can be a much crisper than this, but I wanted it to be more atmospheric. So I was sanding a lot of what I was doing just so it would be foggy. So soft ground etching is one of the acid resist processes. And this is a process I use a lot. Not a lot of people do because it's kind of fussy, but you're basically putting a ground on a plate that doesn't set up right. It's kind of stays sticky and soft. So you can press fabric in it, or what I do, and on the right is the paper that I just put on top of the plate and drew with a pencil. On the left is the print from that. So what happens is that you put it in the acid and it eats whatever part removed the ground. Like it could be something you pressed into it. It could be a drawing on a piece of paper and the paper's lifting it wherever you drew. So you get this sort of crayon-like mark, a little bit like a charcoal mark. And this is me working on the big plates in Murano. So I have a piece of paper over this plate with a soft ground in it, and every place I'm drawing is picking up. And you can see how tight that drawing is. So when huge parts of it just blew out, it turned dark or opened up, you can imagine how surprised, putting it nicely, how surprised I was by that. So and this is all soft ground. So both plates are soft ground. You can see, you can be very gestural on that paper. So you can draw instead of, a scribe, it can be a little bit rigid, and carving tools, of course, are rigid. So it's a much more fluid, you can get really fluid lines. But you can still almost get something that looks like a pencil drawing if you're shading. It's just kind of fussy because you have to get the acid just right, and you have to get just the right type of pencil and paper to get it to record every mark that you put down. This is called hard ground etching. Hard ground etching is a ground that you put on that hardens so that you have to scratch through it with something sharp. Like you could take anything and press it into it, nothing's going to happen. But if you scratch through it with something abrasive, like an etching needle is what I usually use, you can get, so we also call this line etch. So it's hard ground or line etch because it's really good for making lines. And the acid does the work. So you're scratching through a ground and then you put it in the acid does the work. So with dry point, you're doing the work. You have to dig deeper, to make a darker tone, you have to just go over it more. Where here, if you put it in the acid longer, it'll go darker. And the good thing about etching is you can work them endlessly. Unlike a relief print, if you carve it away, it's pretty much gone. In an etching, you can just beat it up endlessly and just keep dunking it in the acid with different grounds on it, pile stuff on it. It's very forgiving that way. If you beat it around, I always tell my students, if you beat it up enough, it'll eventually be good. You just have to keep working it, and it gets better and better as you work it. Another process you'll see in etching is called Aquatin. And Aquatin is a way that it's still, all etching has to do with resist. So having something that resists, hold on, I need to get a drink of water. it has to do with resist. So here we put a really fine, it's called rosin. You put it on the plate in a really fine mist and don't breathe it. And it you bake it and it hardens. So you have these little dots on your plate that resist acid. So in between those dots, it eats and makes this flat continuous tone. So that's how you can get these sort of flat tones, almost like you made them with a blended graphite or something. And that's called Aquatin. This is the magical printmaking process. It's nothing like etching or relief. It's called lithography. A lot of commercial printing is done by lithography. Lithography is oil and water don't mix. So you have that resistant, the way that what we call oleophilic things, which are oil loving, and hydrophilic things, water loving, resist each other. And we play with that. So here's someone printing a lithograph. This is actually a photo plate. It's a special kind of lithographic plate that we can contact print photographically. It's something we do in our litho class, especially to make colored flats. So here's one of our students. She's sponging water over a plate, and then she's rolling ink on it. The ink magically sticks to the image and doesn't stick to the plate, if you've done it right. Anyone who's done lithographs can know that it doesn't always work that way, but and when it is working well, it's the most beautiful thing. It's just like magic. So stone lithography is my favorite kind of lithography, and this is how lithography was invented in 1798. The same stones that lithography was invented on, that's about when it came into being. It's the only printmaking process we can like pinpoint the exact moment that it was given birth into the world. Everything else is speculative, like when the first relief print was done or whatever. Here's some students sponging a large stone and printing it, but we work on these Bavarian limestones, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But anyway, here's some students working. Printmaking is very collaborative. We tend to, we share information a lot. And that's what I've always liked. Even when I was doing all paintings or mostly paintings, I loved my printmaking community in Chicago, especially when I first started. And what attracted me to it was that collaboration or sharing information and people helping each other. And it's very different. Painters aren't always like that. And I just some experience with writers are almost never like that. But anyway, but I did like that sort of, and I liked painting for the solitude, but you don't want to spend too much time with your own thoughts. That's always my philosophy, because you get weird. And it was nice to kind of unweirdify myself by going out and interacting with printmakers, because I tend to be a recluse anyway. So it was a really good thing for me. Anyway, just showing kind of the collaborative. So these are some of the special drawing materials you use in lithography, because you need something that the stone chemically, I don't need to get too much into the chemistry because it can get, I could really get boring with this stuff. The stone bonds with the grease content of whatever you're drawing with. So, the more grease it has, the darker it is. And then these pencils are also made so you can kind of see how dark they're going to print. But all the stone cares about is how much grease you're piling on it. And then there's painting materials that you can paint on as well. So you can get these painterly kind of effects. I mostly use, because I like to draw, I mostly just use, dry drawing materials. But these are really beautiful, some of these things. This is a lithograph that's in the show. And you can see that it's what we call, it's a planographic technique, meaning that there's no real, we call it etching when we process a stone, but you're not etching anything. It's just because the original intention of it was to etch, but it didn't work that way. But anyway, so it's an autographic process too, meaning that, whatever mark I put down there, it's going to record. And you can see that here, again, you can see my gesture drawing underneath, and then parts that I'm kind of building up as I go. So it records like my whole process. Now, this is an earlier lithograph that isn't in the show, but it was really got me back into lithography. I was working in the print shop, mostly just teaching the intro classes and some etching classes at that time. And I saw these big stones not being used, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to get back into lithography. And the head of the department was then like, thought I knew what I was doing, which I had forgotten a lot of it, so I didn't, and said, hey, I'm going to put you on the schedule to teach lithography. So I made a whole bunch of lithographs really fast. But this was one of the ones I did on one of the big stones. And this was a period that I was going through that again, into these scary toxic animals. So this is I can't remember what kind of snake this was. Gosh, I'm like forgetting a boomslang. Yeah, so sub-Saharan African, very poisonous, very fast snake. And just how we're like, oh, that's so terrifying, and poison mushrooms, right? And the scary thing is this golf course that's being doused with tons and tons of herbicides to keep it weed free. Anyway, I'm getting back to lithography. This is the guy who invented lithography. And there's kind of a long story here and a lot of apocryphal stories that go along with this too. But realistically, he knew what he was doing. It wasn't like he accidentally discovered this. He sort of did. He was trying to find a way to etch these Bavarian limestones as an etching process, but cheaper than copper, right? And then he ended up discovering or inventing lithography and invented a way to print it. And that completely revolutionized the printed image commercially. So anyway, this is the first thing. The first lithographs were not made by artists. So he wanted to make sheet music because he came from a theater background and wanted the musicians to have cheaply reproduced sheet music. So the first things that were lithographs were this sheet music. And this is Solnhofen, my really, really high resolution map of Solnhofen, Germany, where all these limestones come from. And the interesting thing about these quarries and where you might know about them, they're limestone. The highest percentage of calcium carbonate, which is what we need to make lithographs. And they all come from there. Like the ones in our shop have been all over the world. And you grain the image off when you're done. So you can just take a microscopic layer off so that you can redo, make another drawing. So they're used for hundreds of years sometimes. This is an old illustration of the quarries. And this is what they're known for too. Limestones, of course, because they're compressed seabed sediment, right? They're full of fossils. So one of the earliest bird fossils was found in these quarries. So you can see it's so well preserved. I mean, you can see the feathers. And this was when you're getting a fossil like this with the feathers, some of them even have preserved internal organ imprints or, just like really traces of them. So they can learn a lot about these birds, early birds from this. And this is just a lot of things, images you're familiar with are actually lithographs and you just don't think about it. This is a Toulouse-Lautrec poster, like some of his theater posters. Stone lithographs, and you can see that characteristic crayon mark. And even the color plate, so this is several colors. Those are all crayon. And lithography can be done with other kinds of things besides big giant stones. And this is kind of convenient because you can take these home and work on them. So giant, you can have a giant piece of aluminum and take it to a life drawing class or something, draw on it with the same kinds of materials that we use. It's not as sexy as stone lithography, but it's, it's still workable. And I do like aluminum plates, but a lot of my students that are really into stones just hate them. But I kind of like their convenience, but they're fussy. That's one of the things about them. But you can see it's a similar idea. So, and they're a little bit saltier. They're not quite as smooth. And this is another drawing on aluminum plate. I work in multiple plates, so this is one of the color plates. And again, I talk about color. I don't use color, like bright colors a lot or intense colors a lot in my work, printmaking work anyway. But I do use like different just shifts in color temperature and shifts in the amount of tin, how light the ink is. So this is a 2-plate aluminum plate. This was a series I did about lawn pests. And I just want to, especially for people that are students, just talk about, I do a lot of research for my work, and it doesn't always, it's not linear. I don't like go, okay, I'm going to do a piece about leaf mold, and I research leaf mold. It's very meandering. It's definitely not scientific, and I would not consider, I've learned a lot from having to research this, but I would not consider myself an expert in any of these fields. In some of the art fields, definitely, but not, definitely not like botany or any of the natural sciences. But anyway, I do a lot of research and reading that informs my work, but it doesn't, I have an idea and I'll kind of run with threads. and I'll go from one to another, and I'll kind of incorporate all these. And then when I go to do the work, I kind of forget it. And so it comes out, but I've learned so many things that are all crammed in my head, and then how they come out is always kind of a nice surprise. So this was, these are 9 of the, I'm going to show you the 10th one, because I'm going to show you how I researched it. I did a lot of research for this series on the biblical plagues, and this is 9 of the 10, two of which I'm not completely happy with. The really funny thing is, when Rebecca put together the show, she put all of them together, and then there's a little break, and then there's the 2, and they're the 2 that I'm like, oh, those are my least favorite. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting that they're, you know, kind of off by themselves. But anyway, that's so I do a lot of writing in my sketchbooks and collages, like taping things in that I'm researching and printing out. And I do a lot of drawing, but a lot of it's really just messy thumbnails. So I'll do when I started just brainstorming for the plagues, I started just thinking of things that I wanted, that came to mind when I was so I use these words as prompts, and then I start like that. I'm really disorganized with my research. I don't do like you teach your students like to do idea boards and all that stuff. I never do that. I do, you know, just have piles of images that I kind of organize, but very loosely. I need big spaces when I work sometimes, because I spread out. So I'm like one of those people that just puts out photos and sketches and stuff all around me when I work. I was researching other people that did similar things, you know, worked with. So I started researching some of the other approaches to these plagues. So this particular plague was, was actually plague, right? Pestilence. So, right, God made all the animals have horrible diseases and die. So I started researching those diseases and how they're caused, and like, you know, mad cow disease, rinderpest in Holland, and just really thinking about our relationship with livestock and you know, domestic animals, and just and a lot of my research was really horrifying when I was living in Boston to do this for the residency, and I would just get so like, because I care a lot about animal rights and things like that. So, you know, I don't need meat, and I just think a lot of this came out of my research. I'm just like, well, how can I know this stuff and still like go, you know, eat a steak? And I don't like, you know, yell at people for doing that, but just my own personal thing. And anyway, so my research would just get to me a lot, and I would just go out, just have to like go out and take a long walk and go sit somewhere and have some cocktails, you know, and just by myself, just to get away from it. So this one was particularly hard for me, but the cool thing was, though, I was by the biology department where the print shop was. So I would just go over there, and they were like, here, go, and you can take these things. So I would find these really cool skeletons and stuff and draw them. And they didn't come into my work always, but I just had fun drawing them. Again, some more research just about mad cow disease, some more contemporary things. Just, you know, reading about, you know, these really fun things. What happens to these animals when they get disease, animal abuse. And that came into this piece. So all that kind of got woven into this. And I, you know, include some other things like like, you know, I like to put suburban homes, especially really like McMansions, like really, really hideous architecture sometimes. These are not so bad. But that idea of us being in our homes and being unaware of some of these things, and just how that's really, really exaggerated now, right? Where people have their own complete separate realities they can go to. So kind of putting that in is sort of kind of like how the 17th century Dutch still lives always had this little warning. I like that idea. To putting little warnings in these too. And you will see little things from Dutch still lives, those of you that are painters especially, or art historians. It's my favorite genre of art, probably, just that tension between that decadence and then the warning, like their Protestant country that's like, hey, you're gonna get punished for this decadence, and the little sneaky symbols in there. I kind of like that. And my work started from, you know, very much used to be when I first got out of grad school, very heavily influenced by Dutch still life. Talk a little bit about some changes that happened with COVID, because it totally, for someone who likes to travel and someone who likes to be around printmakers and physically working, this threw us for a loop, especially the printmaking department, because we had to try to figure out how to teach this virtually. We didn't at first. My wonderful colleague, Deb, who I don't know if she's here, and myself both had to teach other classes for a little while. I taught painting, which was it's weird. I always hate to say this, but it is true. A lot of really good things came out of being forced to do this. And I don't by any means want to say that this is good in any way, but the fact that I got to teach painting, which, I didn't really, our print classes are usually so, we need them. So I don't usually get a chance to teach painting, but I got back into it and learned a lot of new things and got to work with some of my painting colleagues more. But anyway, so we figured out though how to do it and how to, certain processes started to ascend in importance. So here's like my little makeshift setup. This is just one of my, and some of it's cut off, but I started to get really a lot better at communicating a lot of this information, just with images and videos and things that I never ever bothered with. But this is my little just home. I started to learn how to make prints at home better. I used to, I have this great shop to work in, so why would I ever print at home? I'll sometimes carve at home or make etchings at home, but I got to kind of set up this little crude studio, and I would film myself doing stuff for my students, and I started doing live demos too on Zoom, which was a lot of fun. But I also got into processes and ways of working, and I also learned a lot about household things that you can use for printmaking, like stiffening ink with flour and all this stuff that, again, I never would have learned otherwise. But what happened was relief is the process I work in the least. It's something that I really like, and I know enough about it to show someone how to carve, but it's the first time I immersed myself in it. So I just I'm going to really figure out how to treat wood the way I want to carve instead of how I show my students. And I realized that some of the things I'm showing my students to do and just taking for granted, I don't like to do in my work. So I'm you carve a little bit, with a lot of detail, you might want to try this. So I learned so much, but I also got really into it. Wow, this is a really cool process. I just thought, there's no fun chemistry. So I always wanted to nerd out on some chemistry things. And it's just a really wonderful, straightforward, you have a piece of wood, but I found the right kinds of wood that I like and the right kinds of ways to treat it. And just really got into it. So this was really the first relief print I made in quarantine. And I really started it as a demo. I'll just, have my little iPod over it while I'm carving and, show them how I carve. And then this is a piece that I have in progress. It's further along than this. I'm actually printing it. But I started working bigger. I'm just this is so much fun. Just make some bigger ones. And this is the one that I'm working on now. And that's kind of where I'm left off with, a whole new process that I've explored a lot more. And I do teach relief, but now I have so much more information when I come to my students. So that's kind of where I am right now. And I am going back to painting too, even more. So, can I stop sharing? The end. What do you guys?
Thank you so much for that, Curtis. It was really informative and amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to now kind of open it up to our participants to ask questions. You can either type them in the chat or use the Q&A function that should be kind of at the bottom of your screen of the window, and I will read them out as they come in. There's quite a lot of people in here, so hopefully we don't get buried.
Oh wow, 66. That's good.
At one point we had 80. So we're doing good.
No, I hope I didn't drive anyone away.
No. So the first thing in the Q&A, it's from an anonymous attendee, and it says, not a question, but a comment. I grew up in Erie as well, and I feel for you, bro.
That's great.
And the next one I'm seeing here is, how difficult was it to learn etching?
It's not difficult at all. I mean, you need some equipment. It's really hard to hand printed etching. So if you're trying to do it in a home studio, who's asking? Is it someone I know?
Oh.
I just like to
Sorry,
use it.
That was Yazel who asked that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's not, you know, hard ground etching, you know, where you're using line etching, like I showed you, there's all kinds of grounds that don't require like being heated or anything, and even non-toxic grounds now. It's a good technique. You know, lithography, you can't work in a non-toxic way. The only thing is you need a press. You do need access to a press, but it's not. I actually think it's one of the simpler processes, and it's very forgiving. The good thing about etching is when you make your first etching, it's like magic. It's like you know, you see these lines and you put in the acid, you don't know what you're going to have, you clean it off, you ink it, you print it, and it's like this amazing thing. And to me, it's the most magical thing to pull off a press. But no, it's not. I mean, you can really, like, Aquatin's a little tricky, but you know, it's no harder than drawing. So, you know, if you know, I think the hard part is coming up with interesting images. You know, the process itself is not very hard. So yeah, but if you have access to a press, or you know, even could take, you know, I used to take Audrey Niffenegger's class in Chicago at the Evanston Arts Center. Every single, like, I taught there too, but I would take it every semester, and it was just a group of us just kept taking the class, mainly to use the facilities, but to have our expertise. But we just did our own thing. So you know, if you can find a cheap community college class to take or something, or even just an art center class, it just depends where you live. Most fair-sized cities will have, you know, some print workshops or print classes. No, do it. Just try it. It's not, there's nothing magic. I mean, there's magic, but it's not hard. What else?
The next one is from Mark, and he asks, what types of wood do you like to use for your relief prints, and do you give private Pronto plate demos?
Oh, good. Mark. Hi, Mark. Mark's one of my oldest friends. That's a good question. So I can nerd out a little bit because I know Mark's a printmaker. So I didn't love wood cutting until I discovered a place called McLean's. It's MC, I'll type it in the chat real quick. Has like, it's like, if you're a wood engraver or a wood carver, it's like nerd central. This is like the coolest place in the world. And they have a Q&A and everything. Whoops. I don't know if my chat went, but anyway, it's called McLean's. There's a wood called Shino plywood, and you can get it like in 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. And it's, I coat it with linseed oil. So I use oil paint and linseed oil so I can stain it and coat it at the same time. I don't like shellac. Shellac's too hard, but linseed oil is so nice. The bad thing is it's a long drying time, but it's Shino plywood mixed with linseed, treated with linseed oil is my favorite. And yes, I would be happy to do a Pronto plate demo. So you could zoom me into one of your classes, Mark. So yeah, great.
The next question is from Josiah, who asks, what are your favorite, what is your favorite style of art to make, and what do you like to draw the most?
Style of art. What I was showing, I guess. I don't know what style. I guess I like trying to mix. I don't know if I had to say, I would say one of my favorite. It's odd because I like to look at abstract art more than anything else, but I don't know how I would describe my style. What was the second part of that? What was the second part of the question?
It was, what do you like to draw the most?
Oh, that's a great thing. This sounds, you know, kind of strange. I love to draw birds and flowers. I also like to draw buildings a lot. So I just like drawing things. Those are things I really like to draw. Yeah, plants. things like that, kind of organic things. But yeah, I guess I would say a favorite style to work in is like, I guess I would call it like magic realism, or I don't know. I don't know what I would call it.
So this is kind of a more technical question from Rosanne.
Oh, good.
I think Roseanne. Sorry. Have you worked with silk screening, and how do you prepare the ink? What is your percentage of transparency base you add to your ink? I'm using 30%, but was wondering if there's a better percentage.
Oh my God. I am the biggest nerd in the world, but I know the people that are watching that are my printmaking friends are laughing right now. I absolutely do not like screen print. I don't use it. I mean, I teach it a little bit, but I like presses, and I like, I don't know. I love looking at silk screens, and I love watching people do them, but it doesn't fit into my work in any way. So I can't get it to do what I want, and I find myself fighting it mostly. However, I will say this, just from helping my students make them, transparency is underused. Like, everyone wants to make flat, opaque things that all look the same. And the few times I've used screen print, I use it to put really transparent layers of things on my lithographs. So, and mostly as demos. So it has its place in mind, but it's one of the techniques. My colleague knows so much more about it than I do. And thankfully she wants to teach all the screen print classes. So yeah, sorry about that. It's one I was like, I love to nerd out on every process, and that's one that I know enough about to get myself in trouble, basically. I mean, I'm good at registering them and shooting them and all that, but the technical parts of the ink and stuff, I don't know much about. So sorry about that.
The next one is
a lithograph question. Oh, sorry, that's all right. Go ahead, Rebecca.
The next question is from Janie, who asks, what do you think stood out in your residency applications? What do you think they look for in printmaking applicants?
That's a good question, and you did do a residency. I know which Janie we're talking about here, unless there's another Janie, but and you should be applying for a lot of them. But I think just getting feedback, the work is pretty important, but also having an idea what you want to do there and being able to articulate it. Like, why do you want to go here, and what can you do for them too? Like, even talking about a lot of them want you to do a workshop or interact with the students and stuff. So if you can include that in it, that was something that the one at Emmanuel College, just the fact that, Apply is a good example. I found out they had a print shop, and I was like, hey, I'd like to, they don't, and I noticed and research it too, but I noticed that they didn't have a lot of printmakers there. So when I applied, I'm like, and if I have experience setting up shops or, that kind of thing. They were really attracted to that. So if you can even talk about some of the other things that you can do, but be articulate and really work on your writing. And of course, all the other things that you already know, like have good reproductions of your work, that kind of thing that you would do for anything that you apply for, but work on the writing part, and the proposal part is really important, I think. That's a good question, Janie. Janie is a really good relief printmaker, by the way.
It's good to know. Ingrid asks, has Japanese woodblock printing influenced your work at all?
Yes, but in a weird way. I always wanted to learn it better. And like, I understand how it works, but it's the blends that are in there that when I work in color, I almost always try to make the oil-based ink be more transparent and blend like those woodblock prints do. But I think I'm more influenced by Western, woodblocks, the German expressionists, of course, Durer, and some, even like people like that didn't, Schongauer and some of the really early woodcut artists. but I'm just starting to research it a lot more. So, but yeah, that effect, that atmosphere really does affect, but oddly, it affects my other types of prints and not my woodcuts. One of my students, I don't know if he's here, one of my grad students said that I carve like an etcher because I do think in etching terms. So my woodcuts are really also influenced by artists that work in other printmaking media. But when I work in color especially, I want that transparent and that kind of atmospheric blend that really good Japanese woodblock printers can get. Yeah, so it does affect me, but not in a real obvious way.
So Melanie asks, what recommendations do you have to maybe try printmaking at home or set up a home studio? Your narrative painting class still impacts me, by the way.
Melanie's great. She's a good painter. I'm glad you want to do that. You should just contact me and I will send you some information. But yeah, I have now a treasure trove of information about printing at home. See what recommendation though. You can do almost everything water-based, but since I think, if I remember your paintings, you are working in oil. It's no more toxic than oil paint. In fact, it's probably less so to use oil-based. I'm just not a big fan of water-based things. So you can do oil-based. And I learned that you can clean up everything safely. Oil, vegetable oil and vinegar to degrease, so yeah, it's, it depends what kind you want to do. If you want to go crazy and buy a press and stuff, you can do that. But if without it, you can do a lot of things. So yeah, shoot me an email. I can send you some stuff. But that would be great. I'm glad you want to try it. I think you would really like it, especially woodcut.
So Erin asks, when looking at some of your animals and plants, the haziness reminds me of auras. Have you ever thought of them with auras, or is it unintentional with just the development of the print?
It's unintentional, but it's intentionally left. Like, I don't think of them as auras necessarily. I think of them more as history, like what used to be there and I erased, but leaving a trace of it. So recording, one of the things when you're an artist that is you want to get, and I think the interesting thing about a still image, like an image that you just, like why we're not all making films, right, is that fight to record history and to get a sense of time passage in a thing that you just look at once. And photographers struggle with this a lot, but painters do also. That creates a lot of really nice tension. And that's what I like about that not only can you see like that another image used to be there and it's mysterious. So that could be aura-like, right? But also recording my history, like the history of that piece being made. To me is really interesting. So it's like a ghost. So I guess that kind of relates. But I look at it, I call them ghosts more than anything else, like ghost images. So it's kind of related. Yeah, and I think anyone who's interested, by the way, in painters who, power painting and related. If you start reading, like there's a painter named Gerhard Richter who really talks a lot about the relationship of still images, like photographic images, to painting, and how painting is in some ways more powerful than a photograph. And I always struggles with that, but that's like if you're academic minded, going researching that.
Joy asks, do you see the possibility of focal shifting with the relief work?
Oh, that is such a good question. And I'm so glad Joy is here. Joy is someone who's really influenced not just how I work, but how I teach. Focal shifting is something that I definitely like, that moving back and forth, or Hans Hofmann, that push-pull thing, right? But things snapping into focus and going out of focus. I definitely struggle with that. And it's something I want to get in the work. And it's why I didn't put these pieces in the show, exactly why. They're more straightforward, just, narrative. I feel like I'm still learning how to carve the way, or not just learning how to carve. I feel like I'm technically good enough at it. Because I don't think you have to be that great at it to make good woodcuts. but I don't know what I want to do atmospherically with it yet. So, or content wise. So when I have more time, and when we can travel again, I would love to just do a residency and focus just on woodcut. Trying to get things, it's a very binary process. So trying to get things to fade and disappear. And I want to try to do it without using like lots of color, lots of like without using multiple blocks. So having, but yeah, having things disappear. I'm thinking of just, starting to sand into it, just like starting to experiment more like that. The piece that I'm working on now, that last piece in my presentation, I worked on a really crappy piece of wood that had tons of grain, just to kind of not abstract it, but just make things disappear. It did it too much, but yeah. But that's a great question, and that is, and Joy knows my work, so yeah, that is something I'm trying to get to happen more in woodblock. But I want the process to also assert itself. So I might end up doing things that maybe are different than I work in other media. But yeah, it is something that I do want in the work more. Yeah.
So Bree or Brea, please excuse me if I'm mispronouncing, asks, I noticed that a lot of your work seems to follow a portrait composition. Is this a personal preference? Maybe you feel more successful creating compositions this way. Also, great talk. Thanks.
Oh, I'm not sure. You mean like vertical format, or I'm not sure what portrait composition means. But I do, getting to composition though, I do find myself, and that's why I sometimes will even take a composition from a painting. Oh, yes, vertical. Okay, good. Thanks, Bree. I hope I'm saying your name right too. Wow, that's really interesting. I never noticed that. Yes, I guess I do. And I do, like I'm looking around my studio now and I'm looking at 2 horizontal pieces. So I do work that way. But there's something that attracts me to the vertical format. And I never really thought about that. That's a really good question. I'm looking around, and yeah, most of them are verticals. I think it's also because I don't want them to necessarily read just as landscapes. And I want there to be sort of the height being a dominant element. But gosh, I have to really think about that. It's funny that when you do things like this, people point out things in your work that you'll never see yourself. Yeah, I wonder why I do that. That's a really good question. And thanks for the compliment too. Wow, you stumped me.
So Diane asks, where do you want to go when you can travel again?
Oh, that's such a great question. I have so many places I want to go. I was supposed to have a show in Finland that happened right before COVID. I would like to do that and go back there. As I get older, I don't want to check off places to visit like I did when I was younger. I'm more like want to go back to places and just hang out there. I don't like the tour, like going like to this city for one day and the city for another day and the city for, I like to like live, like maybe even go to a small town and just stay for like 2 weeks. But yeah, I would like to go, I'd love to go back to Sicily. It's one of my favorite places, and there's the Aeolian Islands. I would like to just hang out there for like 10 years. So yeah, I think I want to go back to Finland. It's hard. There's a few places, yeah, that I want to get back to, and I always want to go to Italy. But I'm realizing there's such amazing places in this country that I haven't seen all of them. So yeah.
So we're running out of time, but I want to get a couple more questions in. Shannon asks, do you feel that your work is connected to the genre of Southern Gothic despite your Northern upbringing?
Not like yours, Shannon. Gosh, it is in a way, because I love Flannery O'Connor, like love. And I believe that everything you read, everything you research, even if I do a lot of things that have nothing, I don't think they have anything to do with my art, and they must seep in. But there is a darkness and a sense of humor mixed with this, like, almost like you're embarrassed to laugh kind of sense of humor that is in my head sometimes when I'm working, that I think comes a lot from Flannery. So I would say yes, I just don't know exactly where it is, maybe the darkness of it or the chaos. But I am very unsettled by the South, knowing that certain historical things happened right, like, under my feet that were kind of unpleasant. But yeah, I have to believe, I've actually done pieces, based on Flannery O'Connor short stories. So yeah, I mean, that definitely has to affect the work. You're just not always sure how. I mean, I know it must be in there because it's in my head a lot, but these are all things, like even thinking about the vertical format and thinking about this, that, I mean, it really gives me a lot of things to look at my work and think, where is it? Because I know it's there, it has to be there. Yeah, it's a good question.
And so Zhang asks, is printmaking a creative medium for you? Like you said, you also use painting and other art forms to create works. How do you choose different media for different works?
That's a really good question. I do find myself, like, I kind of know when it's the wrong one. Every medium affects how you work. So it's a feedback loop. It's not just, do I want to work? I pick this medium and then it tells me things. So we kind of have a dialogue. And then when I go to another medium, I think a really lame answer for that's more honest is I sometimes get bored. Like it shakes me up, and it's just like traveling, right? When I go to a different place, I like the way it makes me feel uncomfortable, and I have to sort of adapt, and I look at things fresh again. I do that when I switch media too. So if I make a lithograph after I've made a bunch of etchings, I don't make lithographs the same, but it's refreshing to kind of change and try to readapt to it. So I pick it based more on intuition. I'll get an image or an idea for an image, and I'm like, I just picture like it needs to be an etching or it needs to be a painting. When I don't obey that and I'm like, well, I need to make a litho for a demo, I have this idea that was for a painting sketch and I'm going to do it. I never like it. I'm always like, I'm forcing it to be this thing when I picture it as a painting. So yeah, there's a lot of things that go into that. But and as far as a creative medium, I don't feel like, I don't have a hierarchy. Like, I don't think there's one that's more creative than another, or one that's more legitimate. I think they all teach you different things. They all have a different language. Like a woodcut is not a painting. And I always, just a quick story. I was trying to make a technique in lithography that looked like an etching. And I was more of an experiment. And one of my students came by and goes, why don't you just make an etching? And I wanted to go, hey, wait a minute. And then I'm like, oh, that's right. Why don't I just make an etching? I'm trying to make a lithograph look like an etching. I'll just make an etching. So I think as you work enough and learn enough about different processes, you pick the one that fits your idea the best. What serves the content? That's always what I'm going for. Like what's going to make the content the strongest? Yeah, good question.
So with that, we're going to have to bring it to a close. I really want to thank everyone who came and participated. Thank you so much, Curtis, for sharing your work with us and talking to us about your processes. And yeah, thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And I have to thank everyone who came. And it was really nice to see on Zoom so many people that I haven't seen in so long. And also just my wonderful students and colleagues that are here too. And thank you for inviting me and for showing my work. And yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Curtis. This was wonderful.
Good. Well, thank you.
I'm excited that it's recorded, so when I get to my section on printmaking and art appreciation, we can rewatch it.
Oh, good. I'm glad you were able to use it. It's great. I'm going to just type a quick chat before. Okay.
All right, everyone. With that, we'll end this. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks again, Curtis.
You're welcome. And yeah, thank you. Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you too. Next time I'm in Georgia.
Hey, Savannah's an amazing place. So yeah, please do.
Have a nice night. I know it's probably getting late over there.
Yeah, it's 8:30.
Not too bad.
So Rebecca, if you can just, so if you could send me, I didn't get to see all the comments or anything, so if you could.
If you want to, I'm gonna